I was maybe 22 years old and taking the bus home in a major city. The bus was pretty packed, so I didn't think anything of it when some guy sat down in the empty seat next to me. He had long, kinda greasy black hair, and I could smell alcohol on him as soon as he sat down. He didn't look too much older than me, actually. I had my headphones in and was on my phone, but he immediately started talking to me. "Hey, do you have an Instagram?" I made a show of pulling out my earphones, hoping he'd get the hint that I was not looking to chat. I told him I didn't, which was a lie. "Yes, you do. I can see the app right here," he says, and taps his finger on the very visible Instagram icon on the screen of my phone. I was immediately embarrassed that he'd caught me in such a bold-faced lie, and I blamed that feeling for the incredibly stupid way I proceeded to then handle him. He starts telling me to add him, explaining that he's a famous rapper and skateboarder, and insisting that I'd love his videos. He then tells me that I can look him up by his name, Taylor Swift. "You mean like the singer?" I asked him. He glares at me and just says, "No, not like the singer." Okay then. Getting really freaked out, I tell him that I don't really go on Instagram much, but I'd look into adding him when I got home. Suddenly he just grabs my phone out of my hands and proceeds to open up my Instagram account to look himself up and add himself as my friend, all while continuing to rant about his rap career. At this point, I was genuinely worried that this guy was insane, and I was just trying to be as nice as possible in case he turned out to be violent. I'm sitting in the window seat, so he's blocking my ability to get up and move. Still, looking back, I wish I'd started some drama when he took my phone. He then hands my phone back to me and asks for my phone number. I stupidly, and too intimidated from getting caught in my last lie, decided to give him my real one. I then insisted that the upcoming stop was my own, which it wasn't, and exited the bus. For the next few weeks, this guy calls me and leaves voicemails of his terrible, nonsensical raps. I almost laughed them off, showing the voicemails to some of my friends, and joking about how I met Taylor Swift the rapper. He also keeps adding me to these weird group texts, in which he asks if anyone wants to meet him where he's at, and then all the replies are from people saying things like, "Dude, I don't even know you, stop adding me to these group texts." Maybe a month or two after this encounter, my roommate comes home and tells me she has some big news. She works for a yoga studio, and one of her clients, another 20-something woman living in our neighborhood, approached her to warn her about a local creep that had been harassing a friend of hers. Apparently this guy had fixated on her friend after meeting her randomly on the street and started stalking her. Her friend even had to get the police involved after this creep shoved a letter for her through the mail slot into her apartment. The letter was full of nonsense and threats to find her and hurt her. As I'm sure you've all guessed already, this weirdo referred to himself as Taylor Swift. Well, Mr. Swift was swiftly caught by the police a few days later. He turned out to be some homeless guy who really had legally changed his name to Taylor Swift. He also turned out to be in violation of his probation, as he was a convicted rapist who moved to our state without registering as a sex offender. After he was caught, the police raided his phone and found literally hundreds of photos he'd secretly taken of women around our neighborhood, many of whom were teenagers. He did some jail time for this in the end, but in the end he was released pretty quickly as well, because of his name and his apparent determination to continue being a fucking creep. I still see his exploits pop up in the news occasionally. Last I heard, he was stalking women in a city about an hour and a half away from me. I used to work at one of those 24/7 Walmart supercenters. I was right out of high school, 19 and female, and worked as a cashier for 2 terrible years, where I was subjected to all kinds of abuse from customers and coworkers alike. I was screamed at, slammed into a register face first, groped, and even farted on once because this old lady was mad that oranges were priced each and not by the pound. I'm not kidding either. However, the time that sticks out in my head the most is the time a customer tried to follow me home. I had just started my shift, and the second I got on the register, I had a line about 10 people long. For some reason, the Walmart I worked at never had enough registers open, so people were usually really mad and impatient by the time they got to me. Still though, I get right to work and keep a smile plastered to my face while making the minimal mandatory small talk. How are you? Did you find everything? Most customers were very polite, but not all too interested in talking, so it was easy to fall into a bit of a cashier robot mode. I get to this one guy who only had 2 items, yogurt and some band-aids. I ring it all up in record time and neatly bag it up, but the customer doesn't seem to be paying any attention. He wouldn't look at me or answer my greeting. His eyes just stared right down at the conveyor belt. Maybe he was a bit zoned out. The conveyor belt didn't look too dirty. I hadn't had a chance to wash it yet because the second I'd walked over to the register, people lined up. Side note, always bag up your produce. Conveyor belts can get really nasty. I told the man his total, which was something like $4.36. He starts fishing in his pockets for exact change without looking up. Inwardly, I groan, but I keep my customer service smile fixated into place while I wait. He's wearing one of those muddy brown denim jackets with lots of pockets, and as he rifles through, I keep catching whiffs of stale BO and cigarettes. His hands were pretty dirty too, and all dried out from the cold weather. He dumps out an assortment of change on the counter, still not looking at me, and I begin to count it up. Everything is uncomfortably quiet. I can feel the eyes of every customer waiting in line boring into me, all except the guy who was then digging into his pants pockets as well. He was about 30 cents short in the end. I let him know once I was sure he wasn't going to find any more coins. It was then that he looked at me, making this scrunched up face. His eyes were very dark brown, almost black, and they pierced right into me accusingly, as if he thought I was lying or something. While he was watching, I counted everything again. It's only 30 cents, come on, can't you just give me an employee discount? No, sir, that's against the rules, I answered apologetically. Do you want to put something back? I wasn't about to get fired for giving someone my discount, which was only 10% if you're wondering. He wasn't the first person to ask for it, but most people pretended they were joking at least. This guy was definitely not joking. No, I want them, he said, glaring at me. I was beginning to wish he'd start staring at the conveyor belt once again instead of at me. He was making me pretty uncomfortable. If I'd had 30 cents in my pocket, I would have just paid it up myself just to get this man to leave. He reached over to take the bag, but I turned the little bag carousel so that he couldn't. Probably a stupid move on my part, but it's not like I can just let him steal, right? If my register was short 30 cents, my supervisors would be all over me. I know you get a discount, just plug it in already. He completely blows up at this point, but I shake my head and look at the other customers, probably with a deer in headlights expression. People are all watching, but no one does anything. This is just something that's inconveniencing them, even though I'm actually pretty scared. I already started flashing my register light so that CSM would come, but they were notorious for taking their sweet time. I'll get a CSM, but it might take a few minutes, I nervously offer, but the man just goes off and goes on about how it's not that much, and he desperately needs it, with some explicit language thrown in as well, of course. He leaves in the end before the supervisor comes over, grabbing all of his change and shoving it all into one pocket before stomping off. I'm relieved that he's gone, and continue working in uneasy silence. Everything seemed to go normal after that. My shift ends at midnight, and I managed to clock out on time for once. I didn't have a car myself, and would normally call my mom to come pick me up, but this time she was out of town. It was too late to call anyone else, so I decided I'd rather walk than waste money on a cab. I lived about 20 minutes away, and felt pretty safe walking, because you didn't really tend to run into other pedestrians at that late an hour. After a few minutes of walking, though, I noticed a car was driving really slowly behind me. The speed limit was 45 miles per hour, and this car was probably going about 10. I got a bad gut feeling and walked a little faster while trying to rationalize it away. It could have possibly been someone who wanted to offer me a ride or get directions, right? But no. Whoever it was stayed right behind me and never tried to pull up next to me at all, even though they were going very slow. After about 5 minutes of this, the car finally turns off into one of the neighborhoods. I was relieved, but it was short-lived. The driver parks his car on the curb and gets out, then comes jogging right up to me. I realized immediately that it was that same yogurt/Band-Aid guy. He was wearing the exact same muddy brown jacket and was staring at me with those dark eyes. I turn around and start running down the sidewalk, which was still icy, but he just jogs up right next to me. I can actually still hear the change jingling in his pocket. He doesn't say anything at first, so I try to run faster without slipping. Had this guy been sitting in the parking lot for hours, waiting for me to get off work? Apparently so. I feel him staring at me and turn my head to look at him while still running as fast as I can on the ice. Inwardly, I thank my lucky stars that there was fresh gravel laid out, or I would have probably slipped like in a classic horror movie cliche. "What color is your underwear?" he asks. His question horrified and disgusted me, so my immediate reaction was, "Don't be a creep," and I punched him right in his face. It hurt my hand like a bitch, but he stopped running for a second and bent forward a bit, clutching his face. I swear I heard him say okay, but I just kept running and was too scared to even look back. I'm not sure if he kept following me after that, but I didn't run straight home because I was scared of him figuring out where I lived. When I did make it home, probably an hour later, I went to my landlady's apartment first and told her what happened. I was really shaken up about this and told her that if she saw a suspicious guy around the building, she should call the police right away. My mom was out of town. I did still live with her at the time, and she didn't answer my calls, so I watched Disney movies until I was calm enough to go to sleep. The next day, I told the managers at work what happened, but surprise, surprise, they didn't care. In hindsight, I probably should have called the police, but I was young and thought that if it was necessary, management would have told me to do it. I don't really know why I thought that, considering they had a way of not really caring about their employees, and this sort of situation wouldn't exactly have made them look good. This wasn't the only Walmart-related incident where police should have been called but weren't after all. I felt pretty angry that they didn't take me seriously, or care at all that I was scared. I wanted to go home early because I was scared the guy would show up again, but they told me no and made me go work the registers anyway. I quit very shortly after that. I never did see the yogurt/Band-Aid guy again, but it's been about 10 years, and I'm not even sure if I'd recognize him if I did. Before the story, I would like to address that I'm from northern Norway. Also, I'm a female. When I was younger, I used to do speed skating, which is a form of ice skating where you practice to become as fast as possible. I had 2 coaches, and they're both pretty old. There are usually competitions at different locations where you get to compete with someone else. I had been doing ice skating for about a year at the time, and we had been traveling a lot through the northern parts of Norway. We had actually even traveled to Russia as well for a competition. We once traveled to a small peninsula, which was located in the middle of nowhere. This little town contained about 2,000 people and a single hotel. It took about 5 hours to drive to this little town from my hometown. When we finally arrived, we settled into the hotel we had booked. For some reason, they had booked 2 rooms this time, one for them and one for me to be alone. At the time, all the others who used to practice ice skating with me had quit or were not able or allowed to continue to travel so far. At first, having a hotel room for 2 for myself felt great. I had complete privacy and free time to do whatever I wanted. While I was at competitions and waiting for my turn to compete, I made a friend with a girl who we'll call Mary. Mary was sweet and kind, and she made the weekend I was spending in that town a little bit more fun. We were both the same age. We met later on the same day I'd met her and hung out at her school where there was an arrangement. I figured it would be a good idea to bring her to the hotel and hang out as well. Honestly, it was a great idea. We watched a movie, ate some snacks, and had a lot of fun. Then at some point, though, was the inevitable time it came for her to leave. It was pretty late, around midnight when she left. I was a decent kid, so I followed her downstairs to the lobby to say goodbye. I was also intending on buying a bottle of soda while I was downstairs as well. Once she had left, I went to buy the soda at the counter that was close to the exit. There was a man standing behind the counter. He had an accent, so I figured he had moved to Norway from another country recently. He seemed very interested in me and asked what I was doing in the lobby at such a late time. I told him I wanted to get a soda and asked the price for the bottle as there was no price tag near. He told me that one bottle is about 40 NOK, which is about 5 USD. I decided I would not pay that much for a small bottle of soda and said I would be heading back upstairs instead. Surprisingly, the guy instantly started begging me to stay downstairs and talk to him. This scared me a little bit, but I felt as if I had to stay for some reason. He asked me a lot of questions. He asked what my name is, where I was from, if my parents were here, who I was with. I honestly answered all of these, even though I felt threatened and unsafe. I knew not to trust strangers, but I've always had this thing for being nice to everyone. Eventually, I said I was tired and would go upstairs to catch some sleep. He tried to make me stay longer in the end, but I decided to leave anyway. A few moments later, before I had gone to sleep, I heard someone knocking on my door. I thought to myself that it might as well be one of my coaches who needed something from me, so I went to open it. It was not either of them, though. It was the guy from before. He was holding a lighter, and in a very broken accent, said he was looking for someone who had lost it. I told him it was not mine and immediately shut the door, but he put his foot in between the door and the wall on my side and asked to come in. I was scared as hell and started forcing the door shut. I remember very little about this part, except I can make out that I somehow managed to close the door and lock it. I immediately made a call to my mother, who called my coaches to tell them about the incident. I never saw the man again after that. When we got home, my mother made a call to the hotel manager and complained about the incident. The manager said that he will not charge the guy for what he did, and that he will not face any consequences, even though my mom kept telling him what the guy's intention likely was. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the guy probably still even works there to this day. I'm so confused about that whole incident, and incredibly happy that whatever did happen, I stopped him from getting in and going through with his terrible intentions. This story begins around the time of my junior year of high school. I was 15 years old, and in that phase of my life where I didn't listen to anyone, yet at the same time was completely impressionable. At the beginning of the year, I was sitting in my 6th period chem class, probably zoned out, looking at my phone under the clunky gray lab table, when I heard two people laughing to my right. The way the classroom was set up was a long rectangle, so essentially the teacher wouldn't really be able to hear what was going on in the back. The people laughing were a guy and a girl, Eric and Callie. They were somewhat popular, not the top of the food chain by any means, but someone everyone knew. My younger sister knew Eric. They had a tennis match a month or two earlier. He was really funny, and this is a crucial element to this story. He was definitely the class clown. He was tall, good-looking, and extremely charismatic. I wasn't attracted to him, but I could see why everyone else around was. I think it was at this point in time where I made one of the most regrettable decisions of my life. I decided I wanted to become friends with Eric. You see, Eric was in my 2nd, 5th, and 6th periods. The next morning, I poked him in the back in Spanish class. "Hey," I said, "I heard my sister kicked your ass in tennis." He turned around with a big goofy smile, his friends all looking at me. "Who's your sister?" His voice had a specific cadence to it. "Karen," I replied. I don't remember the rest of this encounter, but I'm pretty sure he denied losing the tennis match. I think the conversation ended shortly thereafter, and my day continued until I saw him in math class. Algebra 2 was one of those classes where the teacher would lecture for a while, give us homework, and then let us have the rest of the period to work on it so we wouldn't have to do it when we actually got home. I was looking at my paper, probably confused, when I heard a familiar voice. "Hey girl." I looked up and saw Eric crouched to my desk on the floor. "What's up?" He started asking me about tennis, and once I said that I played, a huge smile spread across his face. I think this is when he latched onto me. He asked for my phone number, and I gave it to him. That day, in our next period, he introduced me to Callie. She was older and really intimidating. I had never met anyone like her, and I was beginning to get excited at the prospect of such new and interesting friends. That night, he kept texting me non-stop. He would ask me questions and then just reply, "ha ha 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 ha," to everything I said. I thought it was weird, but that was just his humor. After this day, he didn't leave my side. We spent most of the school day together, and then would be in constant contact after school as well. And this was 2011, so we were mostly on Facebook or doing group phone calls with Callie and 2 other friends of mine who I had brought into the group, Sasha and Natalie. There were lots of red flags. Eric wanted me to hold hands with him at school and told everyone he'd taken my virginity. For some inexplicable reason, this wasn't something I got too mad about. I just thought it was weird. He would say these things like, "Your virginity belongs to me." I assumed it was part of his jokes. I always assumed Eric wasn't attracted to girls, because he said he wasn't. Although he would have sex with them and tell everyone, making fun of them. We would walk down the hallway after 5th period, and he would stop for a group of freshman girls waiting for him to give them each a peck on the lips. One time we were walking to the bus, and there was a girl about 10 feet in front of us. She was cheating on her boyfriend, which I whispered to him, pointing her out. Yes, it was childish, but keep in mind this was high school and I was 15. He proceeded to run toward her, stop her, only to point at me and tell her what I had said. She came over and yelled at me, and he watched the whole time laughing. A few months into the friendship, I began sneaking out with Eric, bringing him alcohol from my dad's liquor cabinet. Eric was a heavy drinker, especially considering our age. This all came to a head when he asked Callie and I to come over one night. His dad was in prison and his mom was in rehab, so he lived with his grandparents. We pulled up outside his house, and his car wasn't there. We waited for a while, and finally he sped into the neighborhood and stumbled out of the driver's side completely wasted. We followed him inside, and his grandparents weren't home. I don't know what I said, but the next thing I know, he just grabs a knife off the kitchen counter and charges at me. I took off running and made it into Callie's car, slamming the door shut and locking it. He stares at me through the window before bursting into laughter. My heart was racing, and my blood ran cold. Callie got into the car and we left. I don't know why I stuck around. It was like an abusive relationship almost. He told me he was the only guy who would ever find me attractive, but somehow it would turn into a joke, and I would just let it go. I believe the breaking point was when I heard about the baby squirrel. He found a live baby squirrel after school and brought it home. His grandparents said they didn't want it in the house, so he walked outside and tossed it into the retention pond before walking back in. I wasn't there for that, but hearing about it disgusted me. In algebra a few days later, he knocked my pen off my desk and called me a bitch. "Look, Eric, I don't want to be friends with you anymore," I told him very firmly. "Don't talk to me." His head snapped back, and he moved to the desk in front of mine. "You won't be able to ignore me," he laughed. "I know where to find you." "I'm going away to college next year," I reminded him. "You'll never be able to get away from me." "Are you threatening me?" "Yes." I know this sounds like a cheesy horror movie, but that was our exchange word for word. The next week was endless phone calls, and him trying to get me to talk to him at school. At first, it was jovial when he thought I was going to change my mind. Then he came up to me in math class and opened his backpack. Inside, there were several large kitchen knives. I should have told the teacher at that point. I really should have. But it wasn't until a few days later when he pushed me too far. "I'm going to rape you, then murder you, and I'll make Natalie film it." I went to the dean's office and told them everything. I had grown up being told not to snitch, but I couldn't focus in class anymore. I had been a good kid this entire time. I'd never been in trouble, so they believed what I told them right away. Here's the kicker. They called him into the office, and he admitted to everything, nodding, smiling, confirming all the stories I'd told them. Dean Thomas sat me down the next day and told me I needed to call the police. He said that there was something clearly wrong with him and that Eric just didn't get it. They put a school version of a restraining order on him. He wasn't to talk to me, and during tests he had to be taken to a separate classroom. He would do everything he could to get around these rules. He would talk about me right in front of my face, but wasn't technically talking to me. He said out loud to the class, "Some girl put a restraining order on me because she thinks I'm dangerous." The teacher laughed and said, "Doesn't she know you're joking? That that's just you being Eric?" The backlash I faced was enormous. All of his groupies shunned me and laughed at me. Even my own friends said I was overreacting, except for Natalie. She was always intuitive. She said he made her feel uncomfortable from the start and had started following her from class to class. When his birthday came, he approached me with Callie, and Callie said, "He wants you to wish him a happy birthday." Eventually, a mutual friend called me and told me Eric had threatened to kill himself if I wouldn't talk to him again. I went back to the dean's office, and this time every dean, vice principal, and even the principal got involved as well. My school was big, and there were 550 kids in my class. The school year ended, and without the protection of the authorities there, I was fielding more phone calls. When I blocked his number, he would just call me on Callie's phone. He would drive around my neighborhood just to see if my car was in the driveway. He even came to my tennis matches, the ones we'd initially bonded over. I could see his silhouette in the fence, watching me. By senior year, things had calmed down. His attention was finally elsewhere, and I had picked my classes specifically with the dean to ensure we weren't in any together. He was still watching, though. I would be walking down the hallway with someone he didn't know, and all of a sudden he would be walking with us, next to my unassuming friend. "Hi, I'm Eric. Nice to meet you." He told my friends he had decided to wait for me because we were soulmates, and I'd come around eventually. I graduated high school and moved out of town. I told my new college friends that if something ever happened to me, he was the one who did it. And that's all. There's no conclusion, really, except he always knows when I come into town. I don't know how because I have him blocked on everything. I suspect he still checks my house. He's been arrested since on drug charges and a few DUIs. I'm looking at his mugshots as I write this to remember those dead eyes. Sometimes I wonder if I really did overreact. Maybe this was all just some sick joke.